State's ready to proceed. You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the state requests the following exhibits be readmitted into evidence for purposes of this phase of the trial. And these would be as marked in the guilt phase. Exhibits 2, 3, 8, 14, 15, 34, 40, 44, 46, 54 through 59, 75, 76, 98, 103, 104, 108, 115 to 118, 121, 125, 134, 142, 143, 144, 147, 148, 150, 151, 154, 155, 156, 157, 158, 159, 160, 163, 164, 165, 168, 169, 170, 172, 174, 209, 211, 259, 275 to 292, 294, 295 to 305, 308 to 311, 323, 324, 326, 327, 329, 330, 331, 332, 334, 335, 359, 361 to 366, 373, 374, 382, 383, 385. And for the record, that list was provided to counsel in the court in advance of today's trial.
Thank you, Mr. Tennell.
Further, Your Honor, the state would request that the testimony of the following witnesses be admitted as well. Special Agent Larry Hooven, Special Agent Ed Staley, Tina Schwartz, Officer Cody Hyatt, Rebecca Taylor, Cindy Swanger, Corey Stanley, Wayne Bright, Nathaniel Keck, Joanna Smith, Sergeant Darcy Baker, Josh Smith, Sun Fan Fan, Deputy Cody Major, Deputy Robert Ross, Sergeant Mike Freelaw, Special Agent David Hammond, Officer Kurt Dorsey, Captain Dave Lay, Detective Kim Major, Detective Brian Evans, Jimmy Sue, Detective Gary Alton, Lieutenant Tim Schreffler, Dr. Todd Barr, Dr. Dale Tomey, Beth Jackenheimer, Christine Hammett, Emily Feldenkris, Officer Joel Eisenhower. And that list was provided in advance of today's trial to defense counsel as well.
Thank you.
Your Honor, upon the admission of those exhibits and testimony, we would ask that the jury be provided with a limiting instruction, that their discussions and consideration only focus on the relevant exhibits, testimony, and portions thereof. And actually, we believe the instruction that's contained within the proposed jury instructions at the bottom of page 6 and into page 7 would suffice in that regard. Your Honor, subject to the admission of that testimony and those exhibits as I have listed, and subject to any rebuttal witnesses if necessary, the state would rest.
Okay. Before I excuse the jury, at this point, Mr. Whitney, do you have any objection to any of the exhibits or witness testimony the state is proposing as relevant for the jury to consider during this
No, Your Honor.
sentencing phase? Okay. And with that, the state, for purposes of the sentencing phase, will admit state exhibits 2, 3, 8, 14, 15, 34, 40, 44, 46, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 75, 76, 98, 103, 104, 108, 115, 116, 117, 118, 121, 125, 134, 142, 143, 144, 147, 148, 150, 151, 154, 155, 156, 157, 158, 159, 160, 163, 164, 165, 168, 169, 170, 172, 174, 209, 211, 259, 275, 276, 277, 278, 279, 280, 281, 282, 283, 283B, 284, 285, 286, 287, 288, 289, 290, 291, 292, 294, 295, 296, 297, 298, 299, 300 through 311. Nope, strike that. 300, 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, 306, and 307 are excluded. So we go from 305 to 308, 309, 310, 311, 323, 324, 326, 327, 329, 330, 331, 332, 334, 335, 359, 361, 362, 363, 364, 365, 366, 373, 374, 382, 383, and 385. Those exhibits are all admitted. As well, for purposes of the sentencing phase, the court admits the trial phase testimony of Special Agent Larry Hootman, actually the testimony of all of the following witnesses: Special Agent Ed Staley, Tina Schwartz, Officer Cody Hying, Rebecca Taylor, Cindy Swanger, Corey Stanley, Wayne Bright, Nathaniel Keck, Joanna Smith, Sergeant Darcy Baker, Josh Smith, San Than Fan, Deputy Cody Major, Deputy Robert Ross, Sergeant Mike Freeline, Special Agent David Hammond, Officer Kurt Dorsey, Captain Dave Lay, Detective Kim Major, Detective Brian Evans, Jimmy Sue, Detective Gary Alting, Lieutenant Jim Schreffler, Dr. Todd Barr, Dr. Dale Tomei, Jeff Jackenheimer, Christine Hammond, Emily Feldenkris, and Officer Joel Eisenhower. And that will be the witness testimony that the jury will be considering. Would counsel approach before we proceed with defendant mitigation? Well, I was thinking about it, but since you guys had no objection and we didn't have anything to discuss, I didn't. So, ladies and gentlemen, the state has rested, so we will next proceed with rebuttal. You heard me mention that before I excuse the jury, I'd address the exhibits. I'm not going to excuse the jury at this time. We're going to proceed directly with rebuttal. The only reason I mentioned that is, had there been an objection to any of the exhibits or the witness testimony from the trial phase that the state was offering, I'd have to excuse you so that we could talk about that objection and whether the objection should be sustained or denied and whether that evidence would come in or not. There being no objection, there's no reason to excuse you. However, also, and the reason we had the conference up here at the bench is the court was aware of a potential personal conflict for juror 156 that I was planning on addressing after the presentation of the evidence and the charge to the jury, but I was slipped a note that perhaps the situation with that alternate juror cannot wait until that time. So we had a conference up here at the bench, and alternate juror 156 at this time, I am going to excuse you with the court's thanks. You are free to go at this time, but with the precaution, since you've been here at least for this part of it, did you not discuss this case with anybody until a verdict has been returned by this jury as to the sentencing phase? That you not express to anybody how you would have decided this case? You can go ahead and look at media because you're not going to be participating in deliberations, but I don't want you talking about the case with anybody until this jury returns a verdict. Understand that?
I understand.
Okay. Then again, thank you for your service. I'm sorry for your loss, and you're excused at this time, sir. We have 3 remaining alternates, juror 145, 140, 133. If you want to rearrange your seating, since there's some open chairs, if juror 145 particular, if there's something up here on the TV screen that's to be utilized during the course of these proceedings, it might be a little easier if you're a little more removed from the TV, so you're welcome to move. And with that, Mr. Whitney, you may proceed with the state's rebuttal.
Thank you, Judge.
Or, mitigation, excuse me.
Thank you, Judge. We would call Barb Charter, Your Honor.
Okay.
Morning, Barb.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Need to speak up loud enough so that microphone catches and so my dad can hear you over there. All
Okay.
right? Okay. Would you state your name, please, for the record?
Barbara Charter.
Okay, that's good. Barb, where are you from?
I am originally from Marion, Ohio, but I currently live in Haskins, Ohio.
Are you employed?
I am.
Okay, where do you work?
I work for Whirlpool Corporation.
And what do you do there?
I am a training facilitator.
I'm sorry?
A training facilitator.
Okay.
It's basically HR portion of Whirlpool. So when a new hire comes in, my job is to give them the skills to be successful in their career, as well as leaders. I work with them to give them the tools to lead their people.
Barb, do you know Shawn Grate?
I do.
Okay, and you're his younger sister, correct?
I'm his older sister.
I know. I just asked it that way just to be nice. All right. So you've known Shawn then as long as he's been alive, correct?
I have, yes.
Okay. Do you know a person named Jim Crates?
I do.
And yeah, how do you know Jim?
He is the death row mediator. I've worked with him quite a few times, talked to him.
And did you meet him as a result of Shawn being charged with this case?
Yes.
Okay. And during the period of time that you've spoken to Jim, what have your conversations been about?
It's just been about, well, obviously it's been about Shawn and just our upbringing, you know, some of the issues. I just answer any of the questions that he has pertaining to Shawn and his past.
Did you provide him with names of family members?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you have a very close family?
No, not really. We're pretty spread out. We live a little bit of everywhere. As far as our family, we're not close. So.
Do you know if Jim had any difficulty speaking to your family members?
Yes, he did.
Please, council approach.
Barb, do you know, are you aware if he had any difficulty speaking with any of your family members?
Yes, I am aware.
Have you spoken to any of your family members about Shawn's situation?
Yes, I have.
Have they indicated to you that they would cooperate with you?
I could only get one person to cooperate. Other than that, I couldn't get anybody else. I thought that I had other people, but in the end, they fell out.
Now, who are your parents?
My parents are Teresa McFarland, and my father is Edward Meadows.
And were they married at the time you were born?
Yes, they were.
I hate saying this. At what point in time was that? When were you born?
I was born in June 19th, 1969.
And where were you born?
I was born in Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Do you know how your family ended up being in Ypsilanti, Michigan?
Yep, Ypsilanti. Well, my parents, both my parents are originally from Kentucky. My dad was 21 at the time that my parents married, and at the time Vietnam War was going on, and he was a draft dodger. So he knew, getting married and having a child would get him out of, getting drafted. My mom was 14 at the time, and she wanted to leave Kentucky and get out of the environment that she was in. So it just happened to work. There was no love between the two of them. It was just a convenience. So they got married. Obviously her parents gave permission. They got married, left Kentucky, and from my understanding, they drove. I always kind of joke and tell everybody I understand their reasoning, because they went straight up 23, because to get out of Kentucky you go up 23, and every stop they made, every place they lived was right off of 23. But they made their way up to Canada, lived in Canada for a little bit, and then obviously made their way back down, and then I was born in Ypsilanti, Michigan.
You indicated that your mom was trying to get away from a situation down in Kentucky?
Correct.
And this is when she was 14 years old?
Correct.
What was that situation?
She was living, her parents divorced when she was around 2 years old. My grandfather was, as she describes him, as a womanizer, and an alcoholic. One night when she was about 2, her father came home after drinking all night, and my grandmother was waiting at the door with a shotgun, and she shot him, and he lived. Obviously, though, moving forward, they ended up getting divorced. She had a sister. She had two sisters. She had an older sister and a younger sister. And the younger sister and the older sister went to live with the maternal grandparents, and my mother went to live with the paternal grandparents. While there, I mean, she was sexually abused by the...
I'll object at this point on hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, this is all going to be included on a basis from the mitigation report, because that's how, that's...
The approach is we're going to discuss it.
In the event your mom ended up leaving Kentucky, is that right?
Correct.
All right. And you were born in Ypsilanti?
Correct.
And then at some point in time, did you end up back in Ohio?
Yes, we did. As far as, you know, those details, I don't know all the details, but eventually we ended up back in Bucyrus, Ohio, where my mother worked at Baja Boats for a little bit, and then eventually settled in Marion, Ohio, when I was around 3 years old.
At some point in time, did your mom and dad divorce?
They did divorce. They divorced, I'm not sure exactly when they divorced, but I was around 2.5 years old, and my father was an alcoholic, and he was abusive, physically abusive to my mother. And then what I always thought was a dream was actually reality. I remember being in my crib and my dad coming at me and my mom jumping in and hitting him over the head and her grabbing me out of my crib and running. For years I always thought it was a dream because I remember that, and then one day I had asked, and that's actually how it had happened. And I was about 2.5 years old, so at that point that made my mom about 17.5 years old, and obviously she couldn't divorce until I think she was 18, so that's how we ended up in Marion. My dad ended up moving back to Kentucky, and my mom settled in Marion.
Did your mom end up remarrying at some time?
She did. She ended up remarrying, I believe 1974 is when she remarried.
And how old would you have been when she remarried?
I would say about 4 years old, 5, I don't know, 4 or 5, around that time.
Were there any children born as a result of that marriage?
Yes, there were. There were 2 children born. I have a brother named Jason. He was born in 74, and my younger brother, Shawn, was born in 76.
I'm sorry, when was Shawn born?
In 1976.
Okay. And after Shawn was born, you lived in Marion?
Correct, yes.
Can you describe the area that you lived in?
We lived out in the country. It always described, it's like somebody took a little suburb, picked it up, and put it in the middle of a cornfield. So basically we lived about 10 minutes out of town, and it was just a country setting, country home. We had multiple neighbors, and it was divided in half by a park. So one side of the estate was one school district, and then there was a park in between us, and then there was another school district on the other side.
Would you describe it as a nice area that you lived in?
It was a nice, yep, it was middle class.
And did you and your brothers have friends in that area?
We did, yes.
And was it, at that point in time, as far as being with the friends, was it a normal upbringing, normal childhood?
Yes, it was normal. I mean, we just, in the summertime, as soon as the sun rose, we went outside, and we were outside all day until, the street lights came on, and then we came home,
And at this point in time, your mom and your dad were married.
Correct.
Did there come a point in time where your mom and dad ceased to be married?
Yes.
Do you remember?
That would be my mom and my stepdad.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sean's dad.
Yes.
Yes. They eventually divorced. The marriage was off and on. I mean, you know, I was a child at the time when this was going on, so, you know, I know that the marriage was off and on. I think it was solid for the first 2 years, and then they started having marital problems after that, and then eventually divorced, I believe, around 1980.
Do you recall Shawn having any problems growing up?
Yes, I mean, as far as, you know, I mean, there's an age difference. There's almost an 8-year age difference between the two of us, so that's a significant difference. But, I mean, he did have problems. I mean, he had problems growing up as far as, I remember, you know, when he was little, you know, my mom was having carpet laid, and
When you say little, about how old do you think Shawn was?
around 1.5, 2. She was just had brand new carpet laid in the house, and Shawn wanted a sandwich, and he was hungry, and he was hungry now. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't waiting, you know, for her to make that sandwich, and she told him to wait, and she went outside to write a check for the carpet, and he went into the refrigerator and got the mustard and squirted it right in the middle of the carpet, the brand new carpet that she had just had laid while she was, you know, writing the check. So that's probably the earliest that I could remember.
Shawn, did Shawn have problems getting attention?
Yes, yeah. I mean, our mom was young, and, you know, and she just didn't give us a lot of attention. She just wasn't connected to us.
When you say that your mom was young, do you recall what time, how old she was about when she got her divorce from Shawn's
I
dad?
believe she was around 28 when she got divorced from Shawn's dad.
So at that time, she's a single parent?
Correct.
Okay. Was she working?
She was working, yes.
And was she still living in, was she still living in Marion when they got their divorce?
Yes, yes. After the divorce, she got the house, so we remained in the home that we had grew up in.
Do you recall whether or not Shawn had problems in school?
He did have a lot of problems at school. He had a learning disability. I remember he was held back in kindergarten, and I know that my mom had talked to the school about not holding him back in kindergarten. You know, usually in kindergarten you're playing with Play-Doh and things like that, so, you know, if he got held back, then the next year, you know, she would go with that. So they did. The school agreed to, you know, moving forward into first grade, and then first grade he got held back then as well. At that point, they ran some tests on him. He did have a learning disability. It was just dyslexic, sorry. And at that point, moving forward, they put him on, at that time they did, and everybody's probably heard of the short bus. They put him on that bus, and that's what he drove. That's what he rode to school every day. So, you know, not only do you have a learning disability, but now everybody knows that you have a learning disability. And I know that he hated riding that bus. It was a chore every day to get him on that school bus.
So Shawn didn't handle that very well?
No, not at all. I mean, there's nothing, I mean, it points him out.
Did Shawn also participate in sports?
He did. He was a baseball player. He was a very good baseball player.
Did there come a time where he ended up breaking his arm?
Yes, he did. Around the age of 14, I believe that's an approximate. He was a pitcher. He was a very good pitcher. And, you know, I think his hopes and dreams, you know, at 14 is to you know, play sports. and move forward because he was really good. And then one night on the ball field, he went to throw a pitch, and when he threw the pitch, his arm broke from his shoulder blade down to his elbow. And come to find out that he had a tumor that was growing in his arm. And it was the size of a base softball. You couldn't see it because it was growing into the bone as opposed to outside. So eventually ended up having to do surgery on that arm and take part of his hip to replace the bone that he was missing in his arm. At that point then, he was never allowed to play baseball again. I think he tried boxing and was sparring one day and re-broke it.
Was his arm casted when it was broke?
Well, there's two incidents that he broke his arm. He broke his arm when he was little, more towards like the forearm when he was younger, and then later on he broke it from the elbow to the shoulder.
Was there on one of these occasions did Shawn have a problem with being casted?
Yes. He was younger at that point. I mean, he was probably around, I'd say about 5 or 6 years old. They put a cast on his arm, and he was embarrassed. He didn't want anybody to see him with that cast on. And my mom had went to the grocery store and wanted him to go inside with her, and he didn't want to go inside because he didn't want anybody to see him with that cast on his arm. So at that time you could leave your kids out in the car, so she had him go ahead and stay out in the car while she ran into the store, and he sat out there in the parking lot and broke that cast off of his arm until he got it completely off. I think she ended up having to put a cast on his arm about 4 more times after that.
Because he would keep breaking the cast off?
Would keep breaking that cast off, yes.
And you had indicated your mom had worked at Baja Boats, is that correct?
Just briefly. I really don't, honestly, I can't tell you, how long that was. I just know that she had worked at Baja Boats.
At some point in time, did your mom have a job as a bartender?
After she left, yes, she did. Later on, she did, but after she left Baja Boats, she became a dancer for a bar in Marion.
And at that point in time, how old were you?
I was about 3.
Okay.
This is when, that's where she had met Terry, which is Shawn's dad, Terry. That's where she had met him, was in that bar.
Did there come a time where you were running things in the household?
Yes. After our mother and Terry divorced, she was a single parent and she was working. She was working as a bartender, and I resumed the responsibilities of being the mother of the house. I took over those responsibilities when I was 12.
Can you describe what you were doing?
Well, we get up every morning and go to school. After school, it was my responsibility to make sure that they did their homework, that they were fed, they were bathed, and they were put to bed on time.
And this is when you were 12?
Correct.
Okay. Did your mom work weekends at that time?
I don't believe she worked a lot of weekends. She would go out a lot and would party with her friends. So she would go get off of work on Friday, and we wouldn't see her again sometimes until Sunday night.
So who was taking care of the boys while she was gone?
I would if they wasn't with their dad on the weekend. So at the time, their dad had custody or visitation every other weekend. So the weekends that the weekends that they wasn't with their dad and she went out, that was my responsibility to take care of them.
Okay. So at age 12, you were pretty much raising Shawn and his brother?
Correct.
All right. Did you continue to do that?
I did that until I was about 16.
Was there ever a time in that from 12 to 16 where you weren't doing that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, pardon?
Go ahead, sorry.
What happened at age 16? Did you leave the home at age 16?
I did not leave the home at age 16. I got married when I was 17, a week after I turned 16. Or, I'm sorry, a week after I turned 17, I got married. But she was at home from the time from about 16 to 17. Terry had moved back in, Shawn's dad, Terry, had moved back into the home to help financially. She had lost her job, and so he moved in to help. And I don't believe, if she worked, it was like a small job, and a part-time job.
So at that point in time, you moved out of the house, is that right?
Correct. I moved out at the age of 17.
Was there any time prior to that point that Jason or Shawn had to move out of the house?
Not prior to that. Not prior to me moving out. Everything kind of turned to chaos after I moved out.
Okay. Was there a time that Jason had to move out of the house?
Yes. Well, he didn't have to move out of the house. He got kicked out of the house. After I had moved out and was married, and Terry was there. He was still living in the home. I think Jason was around 11 or 12. She had decided that she didn't want to be in that relationship anymore. She had moved on with who is her current husband now. And Jason came home from school, and she had packed all of his clothes up in a trash bag and threw them out on the lawn and kicked Terry and Jason out of the house.
So at that point in time, Shawn was still home?
Correct, yep.
Okay. Did that same thing ever happen with Shawn?
Yes, it did. It eventually happened to him. He came home from school around 11, and when he came home from school,
when you say came home from school around 11, you
11 years old.
11 years
Yes,
old.
the age of 11. He came home from school, and when he came home from school, she had packed up and left and went to Kentucky. So he came home to nothing.
And did he go live with his dad then?
He did, yes. She
Did
took
he?
all of his clothes, she took all of his bedding, she took everything
And did what?
and moved.
So there's a period of time that Shawn lived with Terry, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how long did that last, do you know?
That lasted around 4 years, from the age of 11 to about the age of about 15, 16.
What happened at that point?
Sean had done something at school. I don't recall what had happened, because obviously at this point I was married and had my own family, but he had done something at school, and I don't really recall what it was, but when she had moved to Kentucky, she never legally changed custodial parent. So Terry never had custody of him, legally had custody of him. So everything that Shawn was doing, she was responsible for. She was held responsible because she was the custodial parent. So whatever he had done at school, she had been notified of it and realized that, I better go get him, because if he does something, I'm going to be the one that's going to be responsible for that.
Objection is to what your thought process is.
Sustain, the jury will disregard the last statement.
Okay. What the judge is saying is you can't describe what somebody else thought.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So, go ahead. As far as at some point in time?
So when that had happened, that day, Shawn came home from school at his dad's. He was dropped off at the school, dropped off of the school bus at his dad's, and she was waiting for him out in the driveway and made him go in and pack his clothes and come live with her and her current husband. And he didn't want to go. He absolutely did not want to go.
Do you know how long that lasted?
Until he was 18. Well, honestly, I don't know. I don't want to answer that question because I'm not sure. I'm really not sure if it did last until he was 18 or, if there was some back and forth issues. But I believe until he was 18.
Was there a point in time where the house caught fire?
Yes.
Could you describe that?
Oh, my brother, at the time, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection. Let's lay some foundation as to the basis of her knowledge, please.
Okay. Are you aware of some point in time the house caught fire?
Yes.
All right. And are you aware of how the fire started?
Yes.
Okay. And how did the fire start?
Objection.
Sustained. How are you aware that the fire, as to how the fire got started? What's the source of your knowledge?
My parents told me.
Did you live in the house at the time?
I did. I lived in the home.
When you came home from school, was the house burned?
Yeah, half of our house was missing.
Well, there's no question pending right now, so ask another question.
Are you aware of how the house caught fire?
Yes, I am aware.
How did that happen?
Objection.
Do you wish to argue it up here at the bench, Mr. Whitney?
I'm sorry, Judge.
Do you wish to make an argument up here at the bench in response to the objection at this point?
When you came home from school, did you notice the house was burned?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe the damage that you saw?
There was extensive damage to my brother's bedroom, my parents' bedroom, which both of those rooms were located at the end of the house, the back of the house. When the firemen came in, obviously they tore through the house, knocked down doors and threw them out the window. There was heavy smoke damage, structural damage.
How old was Shawn at this time?
Around 3 years old.
Okay. And did you guys have to live somewhere else for a while?
We did. We lived with the neighbors, so that way we can continue to get on the bus the next day. Because my brother Jason and I were both in school at the time when it happened.
Are you familiar with a man named Dan Chapman?
No. Dan Crabtree.
Oh, Dan Crabtree?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you know Mr. Crabtree?
Mr. Crabtree was my mom's boyfriend for, a couple years. To me, it seemed like a lifetime. When you're young, it seems like a lifetime, but I think it was only a couple years.
Did he live at the house for any period of time?
He lived at the house for about a week.
And what happened during that week?
He had knee surgery, and my brother Shawn didn't really care for him being in the house. Dan had just had the knee surgery, and he was trying to correct Shawn or talk to Shawn. I don't really remember what led up to it, but Shawn had shoes on and hauled off and kicked him in his knee, and I believe he moved out shortly after that.
Would you describe your house as a loving house?
No.
Why not?
I don't even know how I would describe it. It was a routine house. You got up, took care, I think that all three of us are different, so all three of us have a different perspective of home, but, for me, it was getting up and I had a routine, right? I had to get up, I had to go to school. There was no family time or, no loving, nurturing type environment. I know we just had a job to do, you know. I had to get up, take care of my brothers, get them off to school, get myself off to school, come back home, take care of them, fix dinner, do all that, and that's how it was.
How did you and your mother interact?
I haven't talked to my mom for a couple years, but that's how our relationship was. It was just constant, you know, it's just, to me, personally, my relationship with my mother is, I describe it as a toxic relationship. It's just not healthy for me. So, you know, it's not that I don't love her. She's my parent, she's my mother, but it doesn't work for me. It's not healthy for myself.
How did you see Shawn and your mother reacting?
Their relationship was a kind of a controlling type of relationship, and who was going to control who. That's how I had always, you know, who was going to be in control, him or her. And it was a battle in the household, and that was at a young age between the two of them.
And did you notice after the whole period of time that you were at the house?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Did you notice that kind of relationship going the whole period of time
Oh,
that
yeah.
you were
I
at
mean,
the house?
obviously it started young with the mustard, you know, and then just carried on from there. He didn't talk until he was about 4, because he didn't have to. Everybody talked for him.
Well, he was the baby though, too.
Correct.
Right?
Mhm. Yes.
When you were home and more or less raising Shawn and Jason, you indicated your mother worked, but also partied a lot on the weekends.
Yes.
Did she have a tendency to bring men home on the
Yeah.
weekends?
Yes.
Were you the children there at the time?
Yes.
Did you ever have any visitation with your father?
I did not. I didn't. I grew up not knowing my dad.
So you're pretty much there all the time.
Correct. Yes.
However, the boys did have visitation with their father, Terry. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is Terry still living?
Yes, he is.
Do you know where he lives?
He lives, I don't know exactly where he lives, but I know he lives in Kentucky. He's not from Kentucky, but his girlfriend is, so they moved to Kentucky.
Okay. Do you have any contact with your father now?
My father passed away February of 2017.
Second good.
Sure.
Thank you, Mark. No further questions.
Cross?
Thank you.
Your Honor, good morning.
Good morning.
Is it Mrs. Charter?
It's, yes.
And how long have you been
Sorry.
married?
I've been married for 8 years, going on 8 years.
Going on 8 years.
Yes.
And do you have any children?
I do have 2 children.
How old are they?
I have a 31-year-old daughter and a 29-year-old daughter.
Okay. And are they both employed?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Married?
No, they're not.
Okay. And you said you're a training facilitator?
Correct.
And what does that job entail?
What we do is we take new hires that come into Whirlpool, and we spend some time with them You know, everybody's coming from different backgrounds. So we take our time with them to give them the skills that they need. Basically, how I introduce ourselves is basically we're their cheerleaders, you know, as they're going through their career at Whirlpool. So what we do is we cheer them on. We go down and, you know, give them encouragement and give them the tools that they need to be successful. And, you know, if they choose to move further with Whirlpool. And then we also work with leaders as well to give them the skills that they need to be successful and lead their team.
And how long have you had that job?
I was hired in at Whirlpool in 2015, and then I got the job in 2016. However, I also did that job at a Honda supplier in Cardington, Ohio, as well.
Okay. Now, do you have, is there more than one training facilitator?
There are 3 of us.
Okay.
Well, we were on 3 different shifts, so I was 3rd shift. We have a 1st and a 2nd shift, but currently we're all on 1st shift together now. Kind of changed the way that we do.
I see. And before coming to, I guess it's Whirlpool, you were with Honda.
Well, in between there, I worked for the Honda supplier, for about 10 years. And then I got married. I got married in 2010. My husband was relocated to Louisville, Kentucky. So we lived in Louisville, and I actually worked for GE making dishwashers, which is what I do now for Whirlpool, is we make dishwashers.
Right.
So that's what I did.
And where'd you work before GE?
At Honda, at the Honda supplier.
And how about before that?
Oh my gosh, it's been so long. Highland Home Furnishings.
Okay. Is it fair to say that you've held a job pretty much since getting married and moving out? I think you said around age 17?
Correct, yes.
So you've been continuously employed?
Yes.
Okay. And do you keep track of your other brother, Jason?
I do not, no, we don't. We have lost contact. We lost contact back in, I think, 2005.
Okay. And while we're on that subject, it's also true that until these events transpired in the city of Ashland with Shawn, you had not seen Shawn since 2004, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay. Now, you said your mom also was working, even while she was married?
She was a homemaker up until their father, Terry, was laid off around 1980.
Okay.
He was laid off from his job, or actually he wasn't laid off, the company closed their doors. So at that point then she had to go to work.
Right. And his name was Terry. He
Yeah.
lost his employment.
Correct.
So your mom took on employment
Correct.
so that she could continue, I guess, providing income to the household?
Correct.
Okay. And Terry, let's see now. Terry, as I understand it, was Shawn's father, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Edward was your father.
Correct.
And I believe, if I understood your testimony correctly on direct, is it fair to say we could classify Edward as a bad guy? A drunk, not really nice, came at you in the crib?
From what I know, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
people
picture-
change, but my input on that is I was an adult, but I was the child and he was the adult, so did I choose to not to get to know him? Yes, I did. I felt that as a parent, that was his responsibility to reach out, that it wasn't my responsibility to do.
Edward was.
I mean, he could have changed and,
But if I understand correctly, he was abusive towards your mom?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and he drank,
Yes,
and apparently tried to do something to you in the crib?
yes,
Okay, so not somebody we'd all want to pal around with,
no,
okay? All right, and your mom left you.
yes,
Your mom recognized that,
yes.
correct? and left him. I think you said she couldn't leave him until she turned 18?
She left him at 17 and a half. They just couldn't divorce until she was 18.
Okay. So she got out
Yes,
and took you out of that environment.
correct.
In fact, when he came at you in the crib, your mother's the one that stepped in to prevent whatever calamity was about to happen, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then even later on, I think you said your mom was working in a bar.
Yes,
She was single at that point,
yes,
had 3 children.
yes,
She was the sole income for the household, correct?
yes, correct.
Provided you with a place to stay,
Yes,
food,
yes,
clothing.
yes,
Okay. Your mom was not physically abusive.
she was on occasions, yes.
I think you told Dr. Fabian she spanked.
She did spank.
Okay. So she provided you food. She had, I think you said high expectations.
Yes,
So she had expectations for how her children were to comport themselves. Is that fair to say?
it's fair to say.
Okay. Now, you yourself have 2 adult children. You also have standards you would expect them to live by, correct?
Correct.
Now, this incident with the mustard and the carpet, that was when Shawn was 2?
Correct.
And how old was Shawn with this Dan Crabtree incident?
I would estimate maybe around 6.
Okay? And I think you said on direct he's kind of always been like that.
Yes,
In fact, he didn't like the cast, so he broke it off.
correct,
What, like 4 times?
correct,
And he didn't like riding the bus,
correct,
so it was a chore getting him on the bus.
yes,
And he didn't like the guy with the bad knee, so he kicked the guy in the knee.
correct,
And he wasn't getting what he wanted, so he squirted some mustard on the carpet.
correct.
Now, is it fair to say that when Shawn doesn't get what he wants, he acts out aggressively?
Yes,
Now, in fact, when you spoke to Dr. Fabian, you indicated to him that at one point you were thinking about Shawn living with you,
he did live with me, yes, briefly,
briefly,
about a week.
about a week. Now, what killed that?
Well, he was living at the house, and at that time, I was working 12-hour shifts at CYT, at the Honda supplier, and I had to be up at 3:30 in the morning. He was working, but that was one of the stipulations of living with me, is that he did have to work. And so it was around 11:30, 12 o'clock, because he'd worked second shift, and I was in bed sleeping. And he came home, and there was a female with him. I didn't see them. I just heard them. And I believe at one point I did get up and you know, tell him, hey, I got to get, you know, I have to be to work at 3:30. I have to get up at 3:30 to be to work at 4:30 to be quiet. And at some point they left. And when he left, for whatever reason, he left my door propped wide open. I mean, critters could walk in the house, but you know, here it's midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and my door's propped wide open. I couldn't understand why he would have done that. It upset me, so I shut the door and locked it. He did not have a key to the house, so I locked the door, and you know, thought, you know, if you didn't have that much respect, then you can go and stay at Mom's house, which was around the corner. So the following day, he called, she called, and he called, and, you know, apologized and asked if he could come back. And I told him that yes, he could, and that to not do that again, and that I would leave the door unlocked for him, you know, to come home in the morning. I was at work, I think it was around approximately 12:30, 1 o'clock. They came my mom came to work to pull me out of work because she didn't want to drive me home, because somebody had broke into my house and just totally tore my house from one end to the other. Shawn was the first person in the house, and that's how they knew that the house was broken into, is because he contacted Mom and said, hey, I think Barb's house was broken into. And then she came over, and then they called the police, and I blamed him for doing it. He swore that he didn't do it. The police department took him to Bowling Green University, or Bowling Green, I don't know where they took him to, but they took him to Bowling Green, did a polygraph on him, and he passed the polygraph. He didn't do it. Somebody did, but moving forward after that point, he stayed with my mom, because I was angry.
Because you didn't want him back in your house?
No. Well, at that,
And
you know, obviously...
your initial reaction was that he had done this?
He did it, yes.
Now, when you say the door was propped open when he left, was it just left open, or was it actually physically?
It was physically propped open.
With an object?
With an object, yes.
Okay, so it was on purpose?
It was on it was on purpose.
So again,
It wasn't like it was opened up all the way. It was propped open on purpose.
He didn't get his way, so he got back.
No, this was the night before. This was the night
No,
before my house.
I'm going back.
I'm sorry.
I'm going back.
Oh, okay,
He had
I'm
his
sorry.
lady friend there.
I
And you
apologize.
told him you need to be quiet. And so he left, and his payback for that was to prop your door open.
I guess. I don't know what the reasoning was. I never asked what the reasoning was. I mean, at that point, the next, I just told him
But he-
on the phone call, just please, have some respect, I mean, at the time, it was just me there. My ex-husband and I had shared parenting with the girls, so at that particular time, they were at their dad's, but, if my girls were home, you just can't be doing that. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and anybody could have walked into the house at that point,
Even leaving it unlocked gets you broken into.
Absolutely. I learned my lesson.
Let's see, you said Shawn played baseball?
Correct.
And if I heard you correctly, at one point you described your childhood as a normal childhood.
It was a normal yeah. I mean, if you don't know any better, of course it's a normal childhood.
Nothing further?
Redirect?
Barb, you just said if somebody didn't know you better, it would be a normal childhood. Is that right?
That's correct.
I know in some of the questions Mr. Tennell asked you, you mentioned that you worked ever since you left home,
Correct.
right? And you indicated where you worked,
Yes.
and you also indicated that you pretty much always worked.
Yes.
I'll just ask, do you have a good relationship with your husband?
I do.
You have a good marriage?
I do.
Are your children decent citizens?
They are.
And they're both real good girls?
They are.
But you lived in the same situation that Shawn did?
I did.
You and I had kicked around before that you've never killed anybody. Is that right?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yet you grew up the same way Shawn did.
I did.
And then you and I also discussed that the hardest question for you to answer would be, why are you so different than Shawn? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know why?
Because I've always had to be responsible. I had, from an early age, I can't just go out and kill somebody. I have responsibilities. I have children to take care of. I have, a job. I've been out in society working, and just trying to make a living.
For everything that you've been through, have you done well?
For everything I've been through, yes, I have. I think so.
And you get support at home?
I do get a lot of support from my husband. If it wasn't for my husband, I wouldn't have the strength I have right now.
Nothing further, Judge.
It's fair to say, is it not, that you made certain life choices that directed you in a responsible manner to live a responsible lifestyle, correct?
Correct.
And it was up to you.
Correct.
Any follow-up based on that, Mr.?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. You're excused.
Thank you.
It's now 10:30 a.m. We've been out here about 90 minutes. It's a good time to give the jury a brief recess. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-15-minute break at this time. Again, please don't discuss this case with anyone or your fellow jurors. Don't let anybody discuss it with you. Don't form any opinion or draw any conclusions until everything's been presented and have the instructions of law. With that, we'll be in recess for about 10-15 minutes.